Welcome to Watch Celeb Report, and today we are looking at individuals who correctly forecasted catastrophic events. Stanley Adams and the Titanic disaster. The tragic sinking of the RMS Titanic seemed almost inconceivable. After all, the grand British ocean liner had been hailed as unsinkable, yet it was no match for the iceberg it struck.
Is there anyone there?
Yes, what do you see?
Iceberg, right ahead!
Thank you.
Hours prior to the collision, Stanley Adams, the wireless operator aboard the SS Mesaba, sent a crucial message warning of, quote, heavy pack ice and a greater number of large icebergs in the Atlantic. Titanic's wireless operator Jack Phillips received and acknowledged the message, but it never reached the bridge.
Thanks. Once Phillips had replied to Adams's message, there was no communication between the two ships for around 10 minutes.
Meanwhile, Captain Edward Smith had already dismissed earlier warnings about ice. Had he acted upon these alerts, the devastating loss of his life, along with over 1,000 others, might have been averted.
Captain! Captain! Sir!
Harry Markopolos and the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. Bernie Madoff orchestrated a fraudulent investment operation that siphoned approximately $65 billion from unsuspecting clients. Lured by the promise of consistent 18% returns, entire families entrusted their wealth to him. In reality, he was merely transferring clients' funds into a separate bank account instead of investing, while employees forged trade reports in what became an enormous Ponzi scheme. His composure was unsettling. Looking back, that alone should have been a red flag. In 1999, financial analyst Harry Markopolos uncovered compelling evidence of fraud, concluding that Madoff's gains were mathematically impossible. Harry started analyzing it, dissecting the returns, and within 4 hours he said, "Frank, this is a Ponzi scheme." Between 2000 and 2005, he repeatedly warned the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission about Madoff's deception. Though Madoff confessed in 2008, authorities had the chance to stop him years earlier. After Madoff...
Nothing phases me. After Madoff, nothing ever will. Because I saw the absolute worst part of humanity at that case.
Li Wenliang and COVID-19. On December 30th, 2019, Wuhan's Centers for Disease Prevention and Control issued a warning to local hospitals about a concerning rise in what was believed to be pneumonia. Authorities reported 44 cases, with 11 in serious condition. However, Li Wenliang, an ophthalmologist at Wuhan Central Hospital, obtained a report referencing, quote, SARS coronavirus. He privately shared this information in a WeChat group with fellow medical school alumni, warning them that a quarantined patient at his hospital had tested positive for a coronavirus. Although he explicitly asked that the information remain confidential, it quickly spread. Li was reprimanded by his employers and forced to sign a letter of admonition, which he later shared on social media. Chinese state media later reported that Li was among several whistleblowers silenced by police. Public calls for Li and the others to be vindicated grew online. The following month, he contracted COVID-19 from a patient, and on February 7, 2020, he passed away at just 34 years old. Ferdinand Foch and World War II. The global conflict that raged from 1914 to 1918 was first known as the Great War, often described as the war to end all wars. But that was far from reality, as World War II erupted barely 2 decades later. One of the few who foresaw this was Ferdinand Foch, the French general who served as Supreme Allied Commander on the Western Front during World War I. Foch played a role in the Treaty of Versailles, believing it should have imposed even stricter terms on Germany. The German army was limited to 100,000 men, the Navy was restricted to 6 battleships, and submarines were outright banned. He reportedly referred to the treaty as, quote, an armistice for 20 years. His warning proved prophetic. Though Foch passed away in 1929, he did not live to see his post-war fears come true. Ivor Van Heerden and Hurricane Katrina. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina swept across the southern United States, but the most devastating destruction struck New Orleans. The city was overwhelmed by catastrophic flooding when the levees, designed to protect it, failed under the storm's force. You know why the looters got out of control? Because most of our resources were focused on saving lives. Thousands of them. Ivor Van Heerden, then deputy director of the Louisiana State University Hurricane Center, had been warning about this very scenario for years. This is a slide from 1999 when we started. This is what we were predicting. This is what we were trying to get people to listen to. A storm like Katrina, he warned, would be disastrous. 4 years before the hurricane hit, Van Heerden repeatedly raised concerns about the levee's poor condition and criticized the federal government's inaction. His worst fears came true, and he later published a book detailing the failure titled The Storm. This is a major American city, protected by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It was supposed to be state-of-the-art engineering, and it failed so completely. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 disaster. In aviation, safety is everything, not just for the pilots, but for everyone involved. On March 3, 1974, Turkish Airlines Flight 981 took off from Istanbul Yeşilköy Airport, bound for London Heathrow. It made a scheduled stop at Paris Orly Airport, where 50 passengers disembarked and another 216 boarded. Shortly after takeoff, the rear left cargo door tore off, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction. The plane crashed into the Ermenonville forest, killing all 346 passengers and crew. It slammed into the ground at nearly 800 kilometers per hour. The impact shattered the aircraft into thousands of fragments, and there was no fire, just sheer destructive force. The issue stemmed from a design flaw. The cargo door appeared secure even when improperly latched. The baggage handler, unaware of the critical inspection needed, failed to check the verification window. And the reason? No one had ever explained to him why it mattered. He had never been properly trained. He had only watched others do it. 2 years earlier, Convair engineer Dan Applegate had warned that such a disaster was inevitable without a redesign. Tragically, his prediction came true. The incident led to a new locking mechanism, ensuring the latches were fully secured before takeoff. Jan Hatzius and the 2007-2008 financial crisis. A combination of reckless lending, inadequate oversight, and systemic financial mismanagement culminated in the worst global financial crisis since the Great Depression. All transactions came to a halt. Tens of thousands of deals were frozen overnight. Hedge funds that had assets with Lehman Brothers in London were devastated to discover they could no longer retrieve them. The collapse was swift and severe. In 2007, John Hatzius, chief economist at Goldman Sachs, initially suggested that a full-blown recession was unlikely. However, he acknowledged that the possibility remained. As the economy continued its downward spiral, Goldman Sachs formally predicted a recession by January 2008.
The red flag is basically the increase in the unemployment rate, which now has now totals about a third of a percentage point on a 3-month average basis.
While Hatzius was not the only economist warning of trouble, his predictions were among the most precise. Though his insights alone could not have prevented the global economic collapse, they serve as a critical reminder of the importance of economic forecasting.
We can have a lasting economic recovery in the sense that, the economy grows through 2010. We expect it to grow, but we don't expect it to grow that quickly.
Nikola Tesla and fossil fuel risks. Easily the most renowned figure on this list, Nikola Tesla was one of the greatest minds of his time, and his influence continues to this day. Tesla was a pioneer in electrical engineering, developing innovative systems for wireless lighting and securing over 200 patents for his groundbreaking inventions. However, his foresight extended far beyond electricity. He also warned of the dangers of relying on fossil fuels for energy. Tesla recognized that coal, oil, and gas were finite resources that would eventually be depleted, even if not in his lifetime. In 1915, he wrote that fossil fuel consumption needed to be curbed in the interest of coming generations, advocating for a shift toward renewable energy, particularly solar power. Electrons are the only moving parts in a solar cell, and they all return to where they came from. There's nothing to wear out or deplete. Despite his warnings, Tesla's call for sustainable energy went largely ignored. Had his advice been heeded, the world might have transitioned to renewable energy much earlier, potentially mitigating the environmental challenges we face today. Roger Boisjoly and the Challenger disaster. On the morning of January 28, 1986, millions of Americans tuned in to watch the Space Shuttle Challenger launch into the sky. It was meant to be a historic moment, but just 73 seconds after liftoff, tragedy struck. The shuttle broke apart, killing all 7 crew members on board. When we first saw the explosion, we didn't know exactly what had happened. We tried to convince ourselves it wasn't the disaster it so clearly was. In the months leading up to the launch, mechanical engineer Roger Boisjoly, whose company, Morton Thiokol, was involved in the shuttle's development, warned that the freezing temperatures could cause the O-rings in the shuttle's solid rocket boosters to fail. If that happened, it could lead to catastrophic failure. Boisjoly repeatedly sounded the alarm, insisting that cold temperatures had a direct impact on the O-ring's performance. This was a meeting where the determination was to launch, and it was up to us to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was not safe to do so. Despite his urgent warnings, NASA proceeded with the launch. Sadly, Boisjoly's worst fears came true, cementing the Challenger disaster as one of the most tragic moments in space exploration history. John P. O'Neill and the 9/11 attacks. The September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks sent shockwaves around the world. We heard a big bang, then we saw smoke and everyone started running. Then we saw the plane hit on the other side of the building. For many, the attacks came as a complete shock. But for FBI counterterrorism expert John Patrick O'Neill, the warning signs had been there for years. O'Neill played a key role in apprehending Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. The agents asked if he could remove Youssef's blindfold, and I said, "Sure, go ahead." As soon as he focused his eyes, we were right next to the World Trade Center. One of the agents nudged him and said, "You see it still?" O'Neill became increasingly focused on Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, gathering intelligence and warning of an impending attack on U.S. soil. My dad had a lot of video of Osama bin Laden. Whatever was out there was actually in his apartment. He studied him closely, watching the videos multiple times. But O'Neill's concerns were largely dismissed. Frustrated with the lack of action, he left the FBI in August 2001 and took a new job, Chief of Security at the World Trade Center. Tragically, less than a month later, O'Neill lost his life in the very attack he had tried to prevent.
And he said, I sense a shift, and I think things are going to happen. And I said, when? He said, I don't know, but soon.